welcome on this Thursday, August 20th, to the Florida Restorative Justice Association monthly field Zoom meeting. And this month of August, we welcome ourselves here with a wonderful guest speaker following our Florida primaries that happened yesterday, on the 18th. We're on the 20th, 2 days ago. Our Florida primaries occurred, and so much went on across the state, some surprises, some expectations, but leading up to our Florida primaries, I know that on my phone I was getting a significant amount of text messages, um, all kinds of communications about laws that were going on, that folks being disenfranchised from being able to vote, a lot of energy around our voting space. That's the way that I want to speak into it. And so I thought that this would be a good opportunity in August for us to be thinking about how that impacted us and how we heal through those things. But as we are beginning our meeting, welcome to our Florida Restorative Justice Association group. Um, I like to welcome and acknowledge that, well, I'm currently in California, but I welcome and acknowledge the land in Florida that was given to us by our indigenous forefathers before, the Miccosukee tribe, the mixed Seminole tribe that has a number of people included in that as we've gone on through the years and developed into our different colonies and sections. But we always want to honor that we were gifted the land, to respect and honor the land, to love the water, because we recognize that water is life, especially as we think about the ways that we care and connect with each other in community. And what I on our call today, I'm going to introduce, and that's Hakim Crampton. I'm glad to have been introduced to Hakim and his work from our other board member, Stephen Mangual, who I'm hoping will join this call. And when I turn it over, I'll check for where Stephen is. But I wanted to introduce Hakim. I'm excited, is a national education and criminal justice consultant, trainer, and certified leadership challenge coach. Hakim is a healing-centered engagement and restorative justice holistic practitioner and a youth leadership specialist. Currently serves as the government relations liaison for Citizens for Prison Reform and brings nearly 2 decades of experience in leadership, youth development, programming, and juvenile justice advocacy. Hakim is noted for being a creator of SLAM, SLAM lyrical education, an English language arts hip hop based curriculum series of 6 workbooks for grades 4 through 12, and the creator of the PACT Leadership Team Building Practice Model. Hakim is an Amazon best-selling author with 9 books currently available in print and has been published in journals and periodicals over a dozen times. As a community organizer and education advocate, Hakim has received over 2 dozen local, state, and national awards for his service to schools, communities, and organizations. In 2019, Governor Gretchen, Whitmer appointed Hakim to a 4-term on the Michigan Indigent Defense Commission, making him the first formerly incarcerated person appointed by a governor to serve a term on a state commission. Yay. While as a commissioner, Hakim served as chair of the DEI committee while also sitting on 2 other committees on the commission. His term expired in the end of April 2023, and we welcome you, Hakim. Thank you for being here today to join us.
Absolutely. Thank you. I appreciate this opportunity. Big shout out to your entire association, doing phenomenal work in the state of Florida for restoring a sense of wellness and a sense of justice and a sense of fairness and a sense of opportunity, a sense of change, because that's what restoration is really all about. So I'm really excited to be here to talk, not only from my experience, but from my knowledge, as well as a community member experiencing trauma and harm in the community, and likewise causing trauma and harm in the community, and full circle seeking a mission in life to restore myself, to recover from those things that harmed me, that caused me to harm, because none of us choose the neighborhood we're born into. None of us choose the household we're born into. None of us choose the family we're raised with. And these are things that happen to us in life. And one of the things about overcoming trauma is this realization that is not my fault. But as I grow and mature in life, I ultimately become responsible as an adult, especially as a growing, maturing adult, um, with reconciling any of the misdirection in life that experiences may have caused me. There comes a time when, as an adult, I should be prepared to examine what's been happening to my life and how that happened, and how I could make sure I center myself in an appropriate way, psychologically, emotionally, mentally, neurologically, to be a contributor, to be a balanced member of the community that seeks to be a part of a well-rounded, a wellness, so to speak, community where people don't harm each other. And when people do harm each other, we find ways to support everyone involved with getting the appropriate support needed to restore a sense of trust, a sense of wellness, a sense of restoration, an opportunity for recovery, and a second chance for us all to grow together as a community. And that's really what restoration is all about, restorative practices. It's beyond just the simple having circles and conferences to resolve conflict of harm in our community or in our schools or in our justice system. It's not just a procedure or alternate system to getting to justice, right? We have to start looking at, restorativeness, restorative practices, and an opportunity for community wellness and recovery from harm in community, from the experiences we all have. And that's the lens, and that's the conversation I want to share with you today, from my own work in leadership development, my own work in mental health recovery, my own work in youth development, um, centering healing for youth to be able to thrive and flourish in our communities. But that comes with a toll, of course. It comes with what we call a lived experience, meaning that many of us, most of us in life, will somehow or another be caused harm and likewise cause harm. And that lived experience, really preps us sometimes to do this work, to use that shared lived experience as established in a normal way to communicate, to grow together, to share how we overcome some of the challenges that we face. So that's the lens I'll be speaking from today as I introduce you to what I normally have called, transformative centering healing justice, because it's a transformative way to restore and recover from harm, personal harm and collective harm caused to us and harm that we cause to others. It's a joint process involved, beyond just what we normally do when we do restorative practices, for example, in our schools or in our communities, when we have crucial conversations to resolve conflict and mediation. Those practices are pertinent to this conversation, but the lens that I want to have this conversation is us who do restorative practices. When do we take the time to center ourselves in our own restoration and recovery from the harms that has occurred, so that we can remain objective in doing the restorative practices work that we perhaps do in schools, in communities, in courtrooms, et cetera. These are important lessons that sometimes often get missed as we prepare to do our work, as we are sustained in our work. Oftentimes we need a reset. And this conversation is an opportunity for you to reset, and to align your work, your mission, and the values of your work along the lines of centering your own wellness in restorative practices, centering yourself, centering your work, making sure that it's not just subjectively and objectively carried out, but in fact, you are doing so from a place of wellness, from a place of centeredness, from a place where you understand harm that's been caused to you and harm that you have caused others, that you understand where you're responsible at now as an adult or in your young youth or in your young adulthood, that you understand that in fact that there's an opportunity for my own restoration and recovery and wellness and balance, so that I'm not continuously and persistently still dragging along the baggage of my harm. Or as my brother Big Darrell says, he says, too often we either introduce ourselves or we lead with the wounds of with the scars of our wounds, right? We introduce ourselves, we walk through the door introducing ourselves by our scars. And our scars are postered and plastered all over the place. We're rolling up our sleeves and showing all the cut wounds and the bullet wounds and the stab wounds. That's how we introduce ourselves when we walk into place. And that's an important piece of transparency and storytelling, but it needs to be managed at the appropriate time, right? And so oftentimes we're so moved, right? We're so inspired by our work, and we're motivated to do the work that we're still living with the scars plastered all over ourselves. And so there comes a time when we need to reset. So this conversation is about the reset, right? For those that are doing restorative practices, it's important, as I learned, that doing criminal justice advocacy for someone that was severely harmed by the criminal justice system, having been wrongly convicted and sentenced and served 15 years in prison after being sentenced to 45 years as an 18-year-old, there was a lot of necessary wellness and recovery and trauma that I needed to address and deal with even post-incarceration, because that can continue to show up at any given time in your working relationships, in your workspace. And so it's critical to have a conversation about what does restoration look like when we center it for our own personal selves, and how can that greatly enhance the work that I'm doing in restorative practice, in justice advocacy, in education advocacy, in community mentoring, et cetera. In any of the social service fields that we work within, there's an opportunity to center ourselves so that we can become more impactful, more effective in the spaces. So that's what I want to share and talk about today. And I'm going to begin sharing my screen. I want to show you a slide that I would like your contribution to as we move forward in this conversation. So let me share my screen briefly and get this pulled up. Now I should have
Perfect.
that screen. Can everyone see that?
Yes.
Good, wonderful, wonderful. So our conversation once again is Centering Healing, a transformative approach to restoration and recovery. This is from a field guide workbook that I have developed in 2023. It's called a Restorative Practitioner's Field Guide to Centering Healing and Restoring Wellness. And so I want to call forth into this space a mutual shared understanding and value to start this conversation, that we understand that restoring a sense of justice is something that's achievable, that we firmly believe that we can reestablish trust in community, that it's realistic to do so, that reestablish and rebuilding trust in community, it's realistic. It's not some unachievable, unattainable, unrealistic goal. That transformation is actually possible. We've seen it, we lived it, we've seen people transform, we've seen communities transform. We know that harm can happen in communities, and communities can transform as a result of it in many different directions. And we understand that healing takes time, and it is a process. And if there's any other understandings and shared values about what we believe and what we know and understand about restoring justice and wellness in the community, call them out. For any of you on the line, call them out or put them in the chat so we can lead with that into this conversation.
Here. Up into the sound.
Okay.
I'm going to offer from Stephen, healing, organizing, and advocacy in the chat.
Yes, wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you for that. All right. With this being the start of our conversation, we're starting off with this as understanding that it's possible to do this. And we recognize that, of course, healing takes time, because recovery, the process of restoring wellness and balance to our lives, it isn't just a given. It's not an automatic going to happen because now all of a sudden we're released from prison, for example, or someone's been sentenced to life in prison for killing a loved one of ours, right? The process of recovering and restoring wellness and balance as a result of that experience is a long, arduous process. Sometimes it can be quicker for others. but there's a process involved. And for each of us that are involved in restorative practices, we need to be understanding that it's critical that we center ourselves, center our wellness in our work. And this allows us to take the time that's needed to center ourselves, to get what we need now, to start the process of assuring that we are walking the walk and healing from the pains of the work that we're going to be deeply entrenched in. We're going to be supporting people and walking alongside people and hearing the stories of people that's been harmed like we have. And we're going to have to be standing on the front lines objectively, listening, taking it in, hearing the triggers that trigger our own traumas from harm that could have happened to us or harm that we could have caused. The guilt and the shame could consistently be elevated in our lives. And that could be impeding our objectivity and our support system in the moment that we are doing restorative practices in community. So we're going to proceed with talking about what does that look like? What does the process look like? Why is the process so streamlined that it's important that we take each step in the process of our own personal recovery, right? So the first thing to establish is there's a foundation for the work, for the process. And that process should consist of what I call the arch of restoration. It should be asset driven. It should be focused on strengths. This is the opportunity that when we talk about recovery, we're talking about reconditioning, right? When we're talking about mental health recovery, we're talking about physical recovery. We're talking about reconditioning muscles that we know are there, strong enough to achieve health, to achieve physical fitness. So when we talk about restoring wellness, restoring justice, restoring trust, this is a process that involves focusing on the strengths, the traits that allow us to do that, to be who we are, the greatness of which we are, which our humanity is made of. It needs to be asset driven. It needs to be restorative. That means that it is transformative personally and collectively, that the process allows for personal and collective transformation, that it's not just going to be the individual is transformed personally. It's going to be collectively, because oftentimes there's harm involved that's collectively involved. And when that occurs, there needs to be a two-way process of transformation involved. And it needs to be cognitive, meaning that it's not only neurological and psychological and emotional and social, but it provides a pathway for, importantly, the mind shift. There needs to be a mind shift happening when there's trauma, when there's adverse experience that occurs in our lives, when a sense of trust has been broken, when someone is harmed. There's shock, there's hurt, there's pain, there's anguish, and we could languish stuck in that space where our neurons could be impacted. And we need to make space that the process needs to allow for there to be a mind shift so that we could wake up and the neurological neurons could reconnect in our brain so that the logic is maintained, so that the shock value of trauma and experience doesn't damage us long term. That we need to be, that the process needs to make sure that it speaks to the mind's capacity to regrow its neurons and reconnect the electricity in the brain, because trauma causes neurological shock and damages the brain. But it also needs to be holistic. We understand it needs to be rooted in supporting the entire ecosystem of the person. It supports the person, but it supports the ecosystem of the person. So when that ecosystem is impacted, it's not just that individual ecosystem, because the ecosystem is a collective sociological ecosystem. When we go out in public, when we interact on social media, when we interact at work, right? Our whole life is social. So the social being process of that, our ability to function in society, it needs to be supportive. The process, the arc of restoration, the process needs to be supportive of that whole ecosystem, not just for the individual, not just the individual's, behavior, adaptations and learning process and mental health recovery processes, but it needs to be supportive of the ecosystem. I call this the North Star because it is a self-assured guide to getting to the destination, right? Meaning that we know that the North Star, if we look at it, if we're on the sea or on land, we can navigate at any given time of the year, right? Through the seasons, we know where we're at on the earth and how we can navigate north, south, east, and west, right? The North Star. So the arc of restoration and the processes I'm going to introduce you to that I developed over the course of my own, leadership and trauma and recovery and therapy and et cetera, that North Star, it's a process that allows us to self-direct, meaning that it's going to be critical that we take the initiative, but taking the initiative is a process. So I want to show you what that process looks like. As I mentioned, that this is the arc of restoration, that the process should involve these 4 pieces. It should be asset driven, it should be restorative, it should be cognitive, and it should be holistic. So there's 6 stages to restoration. The first stage is called discovery. This is the initial stage. We often call this the wake-up call. It's like, oh my God, I'm aware that either something happened to me or that I'm responsible for causing harm to others, right? And this is a critical restorative practice. This is a restorative practice, but it needs to be also internalized as a restorative practice for centering healing. So there's a discovery that needs to occur that I've been harmed by my incarceration, for example, or I've been harmed by witnessing a murder at the age of 9 and never got therapy, never got a hug. And I'm aware now that, wow, that caused a series of psychological chains that impacted how I showed up in life, impacted my own personal development. I'm aware that that happened. I don't understand all the things just yet. I haven't learned how it impacted me, but I'm aware that that experience had an impact in my life, or vice versa, that my causing someone harm, I'm aware now that I'm responsible for someone's pain. I'm responsible for someone going through perhaps what I've experienced through pain that I've experienced, right? And so that wake-up call should then motivate us toward intervention. The supportive stage, known oftentimes as the crying phase, because this is the phase when we seek support, particularly if we get a therapist and get a coach, someone that can help us understand what we've just woken up to and can help us walk through those dark memories, right? The painful reflections, so that we can really get to the source of what happened to us or what we've caused, so that we can feel it. Because it's important to feel. It's important to have a connection with our feeling, because if we don't have a connection to our feeling, what we do is we repress and we suppress. And repression and suppression oftentimes leads to substance use disorders. It leads to other harmful behaviors that become practical norms in our lives, that we end up harming ourselves in the long run, particularly mentally, because we are in either suppressive mode or repressive mode, because we don't want to feel what it feels like to be hurting. We don't want to remember that feeling. And so this is the critical supportive stage where we let down our guard. We dig deep and find out who we are and what happened to us. And when we do that, it's called the crying phase, because we get deep down into the source of pain that hurt us. But we're not going to remain stuck there. We are going to move to a stage called the insightful stage, the battlefield stage, where we're starting to learn what happened to us, learn that it wasn't our fault that I witnessed a murder at the age of 9. I was just a child in my neighborhood. It's not my fault that I seen an adult kill another adult. It was not my fault that I didn't get therapy and support and get a hug. It was not my fault. I didn't understand that. And so I internalized that pain to become desensitized to people losing their lives. So no wonder 2 years later, when a friend of mine got shot and another friend got shot, I picked up a gun. By the time I was 16, I shot someone. By the time I was 17, I had 4 other victims under my belt, right? So it took me some time to get in the battlefield and learn what happened to me, to cry over it and say that it's not my fault, because I'm learning the experiences happen to people and the impact that they have. This is a restorative process. I'm beginning to restore a sense of centeredness back to my life when I'm in this insightful stage, the battlefield stage known as the learning tree. Because when I'm in that stage, suffering and fighting and battling, the memories, the pains, the scores, and I'm learning that there's a way out of this, that there's a way to recovery, that recovery is possible. I'm hearing the stories of other people. I get into a stage called the resiliency stage, the stage of faith, the stage of hope, known as the rainmaker stage, right? You know, when you get happy in that rainmaker stage, you're making it rain because you're starting to celebrate the wins, right? Your faith is getting stronger in the fact that you've gotten resilient and understanding what happened to you. And now you're in a better place because you can see behind you much better. Your rearview mirrors are very clean now. You can understand what happened to you. And you've gotten so strong through processes of journaling, through seeking coaching, through thinking of therapeutic support that is needed to help you really undress the pain and the shame that has caused us harm in our lives. We understand that on the other side, after the rain, after the storm, we understand that the sunshine comes back. We understand that being in that cocoon, right, fighting to transform, to turn into a new being, that we know we can be rejuvenated. And when we get to the stage of rejuvenation, the stage of the butterfly, this is where we transform into a new person. And people start to see the change in our lives. Right? It's a process. We built ourselves up and we developed the wings to soar and to fly, to get to the stage on solid ground where we can exhale at. It's normalization now. Now we're on solid ground where we understand that what happened to us happens to people in life. Life is traumatic. Surviving, living life, and understanding that no human being is perfect. None of us know how perfectly to love each other. None of us know how perfectly to care for each other. None of us have mastered any of these things that our humanity experiences. We haven't mastered how to walk this earth in love and kindness and caringness. We just haven't mastered it yet. So we're at a stage of grace for ourselves and a stage of grace for humanity. But we understand that we're on solid ground now, though, because we understand. Prior to that, we just didn't get it. We didn't know what was wrong with us. We just knew that something was wrong, and we hadn't fully discovered what was wrong with us. Now we do know something is wrong with us. We know what happened to us. And so it's not just a question of what's wrong with that person, right? But now the question is, what's right with us? Hold on, let's go back to focus on the assets to who we are, the powerful people we are. We've endured and experienced this in life, and now we can go back to the young youth that we can recognize who are like us and are like us. And now we can go back and help them and assist them and support them in crossing over, support them in the stages that they need to transform their own lives so that it's not as difficult for them as it was for us. Now we can people, and now we can support the community in restoring a sense of justice and well-being because we understand the process, because we had to go through it. It was essential for us to center our own healing so that we could look at what's happening in the community when harm happens and we can fit in there. We could jump right in the ocean and begin saving people's lives, not because we're going to actually go out there and just pick them out of the water, but we're going to get in there and show them how to swim, that swimming is possible, that it's that you too could balance yourselves across to make it back to dry land, right? That swimming is essential in life because swimming is a fundamental part of our ecosystem of life, of, you know, water, air, wind, you know, et cetera, right? It's a fundamental element of life that we need to reckon with and have a relationship with. And what I'm talking about is the experience of life, relationships, friendships, work, right? Struggle. All these different things are normal facets of who we are as human beings that we're going to have to get into the ocean and swim and learn to fly with our wings as butterflies, etc. So this process, the 6 stages of restoration, it's adaptable for any field that we work in life, for any space and phase that we're in life, because it allows us a step-by-step process of undressing wounds that are there in order to actually heal the wounds. Because as you know, when a wound really occurs, it's essential that it's appropriately treated in a way that manages and maintains and restores its wellness so that it's not worsened, the condition is not worsened and could potentially cause death. Some wounds could lead to death, right? And mental death, psychological death, emotional death, and physical death. So these 6 stages of restoration can be used to help us center our own wellness, but it's a restorative practice because we need to be understanding restoration beyond some of the practices that we do in the classroom, beyond just some of the practices that we actually do in community with having crucial conversation and resolving conflict and mediating crises in community. For example, when you look at community violence intervention and interruption, it is a restorative process involved a critical, a very crucial conflict management process, because once a shooting or someone has been killed or harmed in our community, the way we respond to that pain, to that wound, is going to be essential to it actually recovering. And that goes for any form of harm that happens in our lives and in our community. That's crucial for us to understand how we get to a space of restoration. And it's important that we center ourselves in that process. That centering ourselves in that process is extremely essential to achieving restoration and wellness. It is a vital practice that we understand. So I want to open this up to any questions and comments before I get too deep and too layered and talk without allowing you to engage in this conversation.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. We do have 15 minutes left on the call, but I particularly appreciated this in the context of the fact that we just had the primaries, and your 6 stages of restoration can be applied to a number of areas as you are dealing with and working through whatever conflict that you could be experiencing in the moment. So recognizing that we've just had elections, the results might fall in whatever way you are happy with or not happy with. Also thinking about grounding in the disenfranchisement of folks being able to vote in Florida in like such an extensive way. Having that moment of unhappiness about what your voting experience and process was, but then coming into the insight of the different ways that you can think about engaging civilly within the context of Florida. However, you can, maybe getting some more information if you were disenfranchised in a certain way or going through one of the organizations like ACLU, Florida Rising, the Women League of Voters to help support with being able to vote for the actual general election in November coming up. Then having that insight and the resiliency to work within the context of the community, your rainmakers, like showing you what the different avenues and pathways are so that you can be rejuvenated and invigorated to have some civic engagement as we're going into November so that we can normalize working with each other in community through the process. So I'm applying it in that way, but I'm also curious if there's other people who have an application of the 6 stages of restoration. I think it is really central for us to be thinking about what restoration looks like with ourselves so that, when you're on an airplane, they say, put your mask on first so that then you can actually support other people out in the community. And so thinking about ways that we look at our personal restoration as it relates to how we can be supporters of restoration to our community through conflict. So I really appreciate these 6 stages. They align with the way that I think of the work. I do an activation into the sacred circle, which is the same thing of like, how do we enter a space in a way that we can be as supportive as we can for the community that's with us. So I'll pass it on to anyone to engage. Hey, Joyce.
So my son is incarcerated, and I have been going through these stages with you, trying to figure out where he is in his stage. And I think he's somewhere in the resiliency stage and number 5 also. And so it's been very informative to me to see how these fit so much in what he has been going through and what we have been going through. And so I thank you for this time with you. I might have to buy your book because it's got a lot of information in it that might be helpful for all of us in our family. So thank you very much. It was very informative today.
If I can share, oh, I'm sorry. This is Lewis Cohen. If I can share a moment. First, I stand with what the previous person just said. The arc of restoration, I'm going to look into that. The 6 stages of restoration. And it touched me. You're dynamic, academic. I wrote it down, humanistic, and your energy wants me to look further into your description and your expression. I'm hoping that we can get a recording or something on today's session. That would be great. But I wanted to ask you this too, based on what we're saying, and this might be an aside. Do you feel in society today that television, movies, and songs tend to interfere with the individual progress of knowing what's right, what's wrong, and moving forward, especially after a harm, as they're going through the process of transformation, as you said before? I've always believed that movies, because you mentioned something about observing somebody being shot, and we observe people being shot in movies and everything else. And I'm wondering if that also has an effect on the brain as a person moves forward. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. And thank you for previous comments, for all 3 of the comments. Thank you, Lewis Cohen. Yes, there is a connection to the brain's neurology, to the neurological receptors. Repeated instances of visual images and sounds of violence have a neurological effect and impact. That's been scientifically studied. It's well known. And so I use that as a part of my understanding of this work, the framework, building frameworks for understanding community and how people interact with each other, and how personally we are impacted by the things that we encounter, experience in life. So when I was incarcerated as a youngster, I started going through these phases myself. And what was crucial for me at a certain point in time to understand was that if I really wanted to grow intellectually, mentally, psychologically, then I needed to filter my brain. I needed to filter it. And because I was incarcerated and there was nothing but time on our hands, I had a television like everyone else. And I could have wasted away time watching TV, sitting in that cell for hours and hours and hours, because we were only let out. We're in maximum security. We're only let out a few times a day, if we get out in a day, right? And so I decided in 1994, 3 years into my incarceration, to send my TV home and to go without a television. And I did that in 1994. And I also didn't go to the yard from 1994 until 1998, when I went back to the yard when I was transferred to another institution. But I didn't get another television until 2002. So I went 8 years without a television while I was incarcerated, until I had gone through the processes and the vigors and the discipline of being able to manage how I filter my brain. The books that I interacted with, the books that I have in my living room right now, over 1,000 books that I bought and purchased while I incarcerated and shipped home because I couldn't have them all in my cell. I filter that. I had a management system to filter my brain, and television became an opportunity for me. Once I had the filtering, I only didn't watch the news or watch the educational programming that came through. I didn't watch Martin, for example. I didn't watch some of the things that, the movies that people typically watch, because I had now centered myself well enough to manage that input into my life, because it has a neurological effect. So yes, thank you for asking that. And I do a seminar. If you can see this right here, this is a seminar part of my work that discusses the impact of trauma on the brain and the impact to the neurons. And that's a part of the framework that I teach from and train from.
Excellent. Thank you, sir. I appreciate everything.
Good night. And so I'm thankful to everyone as we are wrapping up and closing this monthly Field Zoom. I think that it was really important to be thinking about healing justice and the 6 stages of restoration. Some other wonderful things that I was thinking about in the arc, really appreciating thinking about the assets that you have and all of the good things about who and what you are and how you come into the work. I think that that's hugely important. Being restorative in the arc. Think about the collectivity that we can build, especially in Florida and throughout the South, communicating with each other and continuing to be in community collectively. Making sure that we have a collective mind shift on what we are enduring as we are going through our legislative process, what folks across are enduring or what folks across are experiencing, so that we can have an understanding of how to work with each other across the lines, and recognizing that we have an ecosystem of existence together, and that ecosystem of existence needs to be considered from all perspectives. I think that that makes it stronger for us to be able to work together and to get through whatever conflict that we might come to. And this is the one.
Just be blessed, everyone. Welcome to the space, and thank you for having me.
Thank you. Blessings.
Thank
Go
you.
and
Be
be well
well.
today. Thank
Thank you.
you. Be well all.
Bye.